So are serious errors being missed? You know, are bad things happening? You generate the answer. Did something bad happen? I just want to give you a few examples. Now, let me just tell you that I'm giving you these examples, but if I sat down and you said, keep going, I'm sure I could get to 1,000 examples. So here's a couple. Here are two dads whose kids had von Willebrand's disease, a bleeding disorder, and the dad said, yep, they just fell, and it was a minor injury, and they didn't believe him because they bled too much, and both dads were arrested. One went to prison for 2 years, and the other guy couldn't live with his family for a year until it all got figured out. What about that? How about this woman? She had a low protein S, and her obstetrician didn't know that protein S goes down in every pregnancy. And he said, whoa, protein S of 45%, if you don't terminate this pregnancy that I know you want to have, you could die from a blood clot. And she terminated a pregnancy she wanted to keep. How about this one here? Some guy had a factor VII deficiency, and his PT was consistently prolonged. The neurosurgeon didn't know what to do, just gave the guy fresh frozen plasma. So then he does the operation. The first day's okay because he had given him the plasma. The second day, he bled on both sides of his head, and now he can't walk or talk. What was that about? Here's a guy who had an elevated PTT, and they said, oh, that's just, let's see, it's a factor VIII inhibitor. How did they get to that? Instead of a lupus anticoagulant, you know, each little bottle of factor VIII concentrate comes from blood donated by 2,000 people, right? Only one of which has to have hepatitis C or HIV, right? That's not as big a problem now, but when this guy got the bottles, it was a problem. So that's a huge issue, and many, many more. This is what happens when people don't know what to do with the results, right? You gave them the PT, it was elevated, right? They didn't know what to do. You gave them the von Willebrand factor, and what does that mean? 55%. Do I need to worry about that? Is that bleeding risk or not? Somebody has to say what they mean. Just taking a clue here from what anatomic path and radiology do all the time. Not waiting for their question, but doing it systematically with all the cases that have some complexity to them. Now, who suffers if we don't do this? And this has had a big part in this. Because, you know, through the rest of the world, I know we have international visitors, if you look at the rest of the world, clinical path is actually totally separate from anatomic path. Go to Europe. You know, anatomic path and clinical path are like surgery and medicine. And people do just anatomic or they just do clinical. Here, what we've done in America is we've juxtaposed the two, and we've let you get an income on one and minimal income on the other. So what has happened is we now have this big dearth of experts because of that circumstance. So the fact is that the pathologists do not suffer if we don't provide advice on clinical pathology answers. They don't. But you know who really suffers is the patient. Somebody has to be the patient advocate. We have to realize that what we're processing is a sample from a patient. It's not just a sample. And that's kind of hard. It's hard, and especially as you get the big centers, big academic centers. For those of you who have been around for a while and have been generalists, you drew the patient's blood. Remember that connection that everybody used to have? And now you're sitting in front of an analyzer that's processing 180 specimens an hour, right? The job is totally different. Somehow in the midst of that, we have to understand that there's still somebody on the other end who's really sick. So, what happens if they pick the wrong tests or misinterpret the results? Well, I showed you some clinical consequences as examples, but you know what? It takes them longer to get an answer. The doctors are saying, what do I do with this answer? And you all know that what happens is you're asked to do tests that have no clinical value often because people are just throwing those CBCs at you every day instead of working up the cases that they really need to work up. So in fact, we're spending a lot more time in labor on the tests that aren't going to help get to a diagnosis. The implications of this are immense in terms of dollars. Think of your laboratory. Think of the path department. We're talking about, what, at Vanderbilt, we're doing 5 million tests a year. So when you don't do it right, it's a big problem. I don't know if any of you read the Dark Report, but about a year ago, Robert Michel wrote this article about Canadian laboratory system in shambles. It's a socialized process. Now, they have a problem with lab tests. And the problem is that when you order the wrong test, you just spent the money. Sorry, it's a socialized system. Now you don't have the money to do the right test. It ain't like America. So this is a big problem in the UK, too. They surveyed the internists, and they gave them a little test, and they found out the internists don't know what to do with the lab tests either. They can't pick them. And that's another socialized system. In America, if we don't know, we just keep the patient longer and spend more money, right? So it's a different circumstance. So We're trying to fix the laboratory, and there are those who have done a really good job focusing on fixing our operation. But you know what? For everybody who's been involved in this, what have we focused on? We focused on fixing it from the time we get the blood until we give the result. Then we say, it's not us. So here is a picture that George Lundberg drew. This is the clinician's brain. What do I do? 25 years old with a clock, right? And so we figure the job is ours once that blue top tube shows up, right? And we can fix all these pre-analytical. Here's the instrument. That's the analysis, right? We can fix these pre-analytical problems, collecting it right. Harry Jones, Barry Jones, we got the right Jones. We get it there. It's still intact. We do the spin and everything else. And then we do the analysis, and here's the reporting. So the fact is, we've done a lot to look at this, and we know that pre-analytical is much bigger in terms of analytical problems. But you know what? Here's where the big problem occurs. How do we fix that? Big problem is, I don't know what test to order. And the other is, protein S of 42%. What the heck do I do with that? And who's going to own that? So let's think about it for a minute. Somebody has to own that. It's a big problem. Is the anatomic pathologist going to own that? No. Is the internist going to own that? Well, that's their brain, right? So who is going to own that? So you know what? These two arrows belong to me. And when people come to me and say, Mike, I got a problem, I will tell them I own that problem, and I'm going to fix it for you. And so that has been the focus of what we've done a lot for the past 15 years. Here's a good example. Imagine you're the clinician, right? And here is this 25-year-old woman. She'd like to start oral contraceptives, but she's worried that if she has a genetic risk factor for thrombosis, that it could lead to a clot. So now the doc says, I need to order the test for hypercoagulability. What are they? And you give them a requisition, page 1, page 2, page 3. Pick the right 6 tests. No hope. No hope. And guess what? It's going to be all different next month, and we're going to give them more to pick from. In fact, this is now 6 pages. Now, think about it. So who's going to tell them? Now, there's somebody in the clinical laboratory who actually knows what the hypercoag panel is. You know, you'd probably be able to identify 4 or 5 tests, factor V Leiden for thrombin mutation, protein C, protein S, antithrombin. I bet that for a lot of you who do coagulations. So there you are. You know it. Clinician has no knowledge of it. How does it get from you to them? So are there potential solutions? Now, I think that the front part of this, helping them pick the right test, is a little bit easier than the other side, which is helping them get the right answer. So let's take a look at how to help them get the right test. So solutions have been in place for this, but not universally applied for at least 15 years. And the answer really is reflex testing. So this means, couldn't I just check a box that says, my patient has a blood clot? Couldn't I just check a box that says, my patient's PTT is prolonged? Please do all the right tests to figure it out, right? So then they don't have the big requisition. So sure, that's what we created. Here's the check this box, and we will do the rest. Because we know that heparin prolongs your PTT. So therefore, when you give us the prolonged PTT, don't worry about it. We will take out the heparin, and we'll see if that's the trivial answer. And if it's not, we'll do this mixing study. And if it goes from 60 to 30, we'll do these factors, 8, 9, 11, and 12, and look for a factor deficiency. And if it doesn't correct, we'll think about a lupus anticoagulant or an 8 inhibitor. And we know that. And guess what? When there's a new lupus anticoagulant test, guess who they're going to come and try to sell it to and tell us about? It's us. We, the laboratory people. You guys. Right? All of us. So the fact is, we're the ones who are going to optimize this. Is somebody else going to go up to the practicing clinician and say, I have a better way to identify a lupus anticoagulant? No. So we have to be in charge of these algorithms. They have to say, okay, we empower you. So here it is. This is what we did when I was in Boston, Massachusetts General Hospital, prolonged PTT. You know, I had a doctor say to me, now this is like 15 years later, and when something starts and time passes, nobody knows how it started. How is that? And so this hematologist, oncologist says, you know, I practice at 4 different hospitals, but I got to tell you that one of the most magical things here is that I check this box, prolonged PT and PTT, and even if I write other down here and put all the wrong tests in here, they still do the right ones. He said, I can't really make a mistake. Holy cow. And he said, I don't know where that started, but that was a really important thing to do.